We're back inside City Hall. We just heard Congressman Charles Rangel vigorously defend himself against the controversies surrounding his ethics. Here to talk about that and much more are the four members of our Friday Reporters Roundtable. New York One political reporter Josh Robbins, Chris Smith from New York Magazine, Daily News columnist and host of The Morning Show and WWRL Radio, Errol Louis, and Azi Paybarah of the New York Observer. Gentlemen, thanks for coming in tonight.
Thank you. Thanks.
So we are going to start, of course, with Congressman Rangel. Errol, how has he handled this mess? Two major stories out within the past week.
Textbook Charlie Rangel. Didn't duck an interview, came on early, often, called his own press conference, called for his own investigation, came here and wrestled with you, I mean, even on a Friday night. So that's textbook Charlie Rangel. He doesn't duck controversy. He doesn't duck the press. I think he knows that most of his constituents, who are really the bottom line in an election year for a politician, are with him. You know, I don't know if he even needed to sample the opinion in Harlem to realize that. So I don't know that this is going to do him any damage in the short term at all.
Yeah, I mean, Charlie Rangel has no risk of being defeated in any kind of election. You know, what it could do, get him a slap on the wrist internally in Congress, lose him 1 out of 4 apartments, you know, maybe he pays a little more rent. It's never good to be saying, well, is it criminal what I did? You know, and the other thing, too, that I think is somewhat risky, though, where the damage actually occurs is he's now got the Washington Post and the Times on him. You know, they're certainly going to follow this up with every little thing they can find.
And just outside of Charlie Rangel, the people that I think are most affected by, at least with the apartment situation, are housing advocates. If this would have happened right before the Rent Guidelines Board met, advocates would have been yelling, you know, don't raise my rent, this isn't fair, I'm not making enough money, and landlords could have very easily just said, you know, if the Charlie Rangels of the city would give up at least one of their apartments, we'd have more housing here. So, and there's been a very notable absence of people coming out to defend them from the housing community. There's been no Rita Louis. There's been no other elected officials who actually have rent stabilized apartments. The governor seems very reluctant to even talk about this, even though he lives in the same building complex.
Well, he has a rent-controlled apartment too.
Right. But no other elected officials really coming out saying, I support affordable housing and I support Charlie Rangel. In fact, he's almost made affordable housing a toxic issue right now.
Is that because of his stature within the Congress?
Oh, I think so. He's the most powerful person in the congressional delegation, and arguably maybe in the top 2, top 3 of all of the Congress in general. And I think basically this is not going to affect him maybe in the short term, but in the long term it certainly damages his legacy. We now think of him as someone who certainly has a lot of money. What is his net worth? In the hundreds of thousands of dollars, which is pretty amazing considering, you know, he doesn't make all that much money. He's in the 6 figures. But he's living in a rent-controlled apartment, which I always thought was supposed to be more for the cops and the firefighters and the teachers to keep them within the city, not for someone who of his means.
We have the two major papers, Chris. You mentioned Washington Post, New York Times. Do you think a bigger story is brewing here or something else going on?
I have no knowledge of any bigger story, but the one thing you can be sure of is that now that there's this back and forth, is they're going to look at every last receipt and transaction that Rangel has turned over in his public life.
I think if there's a political effect, some of it may really occur outside of New York. I see the national Republicans looking for him and looking at him as sort of a poster boy. You know, they want to try to hit back at the Democrats. They've tried to go after Pelosi. It basically doesn't work. It's like they're beating up on a woman. She's not offensive in any way. They're going to try to find somebody who they can put up as this is what the Democrats are about, and they're too self-dealing. They're too insidery. I don't know if it's going to work with Charlie Rangel. He's just too likable, frankly. It just doesn't stick.
No, but they will work the fact that Obama, African American candidate, is running, and here's what he represents. They'll tie him in some way to a black congressman, abusing the system, and try to make him a proxy for Obama in some way.
Next week, he says he may go to the Ethics Committee and ask the Ethics Committee to take a look at this issue with the apartments. Is that all for show?
It feels like something that he's going to have to do, or somebody's going to have to do. And from what I understand, only a Congress member can do it. And he somehow challenged a reporter to go down there and do it. And he's just egging on reporters to come and investigate.
But by the time anybody outside of New York figures out how the stabilization system is supposed to work, this Congress will, I think, have concluded, and we'll be well into 2010.
That's a great point. All right, let's move on to our next topic, a pretty serious topic. The New Yorker cover that came out this week, portraying Barack Obama and his wife as terrorists. Did this cross the line, Azi? And it's hard as journalists to talk about this. It's difficult to give your opinion here.
And to be fair, and full disclosures, this isn't the first time I've kind of spoken about the freedom of the press and things like that. But it feels like the cover immediately wasn't a depiction of Obama as a terrorist, but people's characterization of him. It was making fun of a stereotype.
Right.
Is what it felt like to me. And people that looked at it and said, "Oh my God, look how they're slandering this guy." It feels like they missed the joke, and it calls into question how much of a sense of humor can we allow ourselves to have, and when does it cross the line? When do you, as a victim, kind of cross the line in like waving a flag about things?
Frankly, I was really surprised, sorry, Chris. I was just really surprised by the reaction to this. It's completely obvious that this is a piece of satire here. It's extreme. And the fact that Governor Patterson piled on this in the meeting of the NAACP seemed to me kind of gratuitous, and that he was on the bandwagon, that he kind of had to be. But this is, I mean, it's just absurd that people don't recognize it for the satire that it is.
I mean, look, like anybody else who at this table who relies on freedom of the press, I wouldn't criticize them. They have every right to put out whatever cover they want. But imagine the same cartoon on the cover of National Review or another conservative magazine. People would be doing backflips. There'd be people complaining. There'd be people protesting.
But the New Yorker is far different from that.
Well, I don't know. I don't know how different they are in this case. I mean, I thought it was a sort of a. I didn't see the wink in it. I mean, you read it, and if you give it some thought, it's like, okay, they're being ironic or something in their own way.
But it's so obvious that they're going to endorse Barack Obama this year. They endorsed John Kerry the year before. I mean, all of their, in the beginning of the magazine, the talk of the town has been very much hitting hard the Bush administration, and ditto with the rest of the magazine. I fail to see how people could not see this as a piece of classic New Yorker satire. Just like the fact that of Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama in the same bed and it being 3 o'clock and them jumping to answer the alarm clock at the time. It's the same sort of thing.
Two or three quick points. Satire doesn't work in the mass market discussion. People don't get it. We've lost our sense of humor, in politics. And not to sell somebody else's magazine, but the cover controversy, maybe they sold more issues, but it really diverted attention from what was a very good story.
Good story.
The story about Obama's years in Chicago learning to be a politician, essentially, inside the magazine is a real good one.
All right, folks, we have to pause there for a break. We will have much more with our Reporters Roundtable, including a discussion of Joe Bruno. He's riding off into the sunset on a chartered bus. And later, the results of tonight's Snap poll. Don't go away.